In a cave in the dark, a bear and a tiger are waiting. A god has given them a test: eat nothing but mugwort and 20 cloves of garlic and stay out of the sunlight for 100 days. The tiger breaks first and runs, but the bear endures, and when she finally steps back into the light, she is no longer a bear. She is a woman. Her son will grow up to found a kingdom. That is Korea's founding legend. The bear woman's son is Dangun, and the kingdom he builds is said to begin in 2333 BCE. It is one of the most beloved origin stories on Earth, and almost none of it can be verified, because the oldest surviving text that tells it was written down around the year 1281. That's roughly 3,500 years after the events it describes. So here is the real mystery. How much of Korea's first kingdom can we actually know? The kingdom is called Gojoseon, Old Joseon, and it is the first state in all of Korean history. Its name will echo for thousands of years. But Gojoseon left almost no records of its own, so historians have to work like detectives. And even that famous birth date is a false lead. The year 2333 was reverse-engineered centuries later, lined up against the reign of a legendary Chinese sage king. In the myth, Dangun himself rules for 1,500 years. That's the tell. We're reading myth, not a calendar. And look at the gap the detectives face. The legend says 2333 BCE, but the hard evidence for an organized kingdom doesn't appear until more than 1,000 years later, around the 7th to 4th centuries BCE. Everything we can actually prove about Gojoseon we have to dig out of the ground. So let's follow the clues in the order the earth gives them up. The first clue is written in stone. Scattered across Korea are tens of thousands of dolmens, massive stone tombs, a giant capstone resting on standing rocks. An estimated 35,000 of them, often cited as roughly 40% of all the dolmens on Earth. One at Wasan has a capstone of about 280 tons. No wheels, no machines. Moving it took hundreds of people hauling together, and that is the clue. Someone had the power to command them. This was already a ranked society, led by chiefs. And when archaeologists look beneath some of those stones, they find what a chief was buried with: polished jade shaped like a comma and a single curved bronze dagger. Modest treasure, but restricted to an elite. This is the class that will grow into a kingdom, which brings us to the second clue, that dagger. It's called the Liaoning bronze dagger, and its blade curves like the body of a lute. What makes it a detective's dream is that it's so standardized. The same distinctive shape, turning up again and again across Manchuria and the Korean peninsula. Map where it's found, and out of the scatter, the outline of a lost cultural world appears. A kingdom, sketched on a map by a single blade. Careful though, this style was shared by several peoples, so it marks a cultural sphere, not hard political borders. It shows us a world. It doesn't draw an empire. The sharpest clue of all isn't buried. It's written in a Chinese history that recorded Gojoseon's own law code. 8 articles, only 3 survive. Here they are: kill a person and you are put to death. Injure someone and you pay in grain. Steal and you become the slave of the person you robbed, unless you can buy your freedom back for a fortune. By later tradition, the code was credited to a wise foreign sage. Historians doubt that, but the laws themselves are the point. Read those 3 sentences again, because they are a photograph of an entire society, taken 2,000 years ago. Private property, a system of payment and money, sharp social classes, right down to slavery. This is not a myth about a bear. This is a real complex kingdom with rules. And by around 300 BCE it was strong enough to trade blows with a Chinese state on its border, and to call its ruler by a single heavy word: king. For centuries that is all we get: fragments, stone, bronze, 3 broken laws. And then, in its very last century, Gojoseon suddenly steps into the light. Because a refugee, an emperor, and one act of betrayal combined to produce the first story from Korea's past that we can follow scene by scene. It is a thriller, and it does not end well. Around 194 BCE, a military leader named Wiman crosses into Gojoseon from the Yan frontier, the turbulent edge of the Chinese world. With about 1,000 followers, the reigning king, Jun, welcomes him and trusts him with a real job: guard the western border. It is a fatal mistake. Wiman uses that command to build a private army out of refugees and locals, then turns it around, marches on the capital, and seizes the throne. King Jun flees south by sea and vanishes from the record. So who was he? Honestly, that's still debated. We don't know his ethnicity. But what we do know is telling. He came from the Yan region, yet he arrived wearing the local topknot and dress. He kept the kingdom's name, Joseon, and he filled his government with native officials. so most historians read this not as a foreign conquest, but as a change of dynasty inside Gojoseon, and it matters for another reason. Wiman is the first ruler in Korean history to appear in a written record made in his own time. After 1,000 years of legend, our detectives finally have a witness. Wiman's grandson, King Ugeo, made the kingdom rich by the way it sat on the map, as the middleman. Gojoseon stood between Han China, the vast empire to its west, and the peoples of the south, and Ugeo controlled the valve. He blocked those southern peoples from dealing directly with the Han court, forcing everything to pass through him. It made him wealthy. It also made him a target, because Emperor Wu of Han saw a strong, independent Gojoseon on his flank, one that might side with his great northern enemy, the nomadic Xiongnu, and decided it had to be broken. The spark was almost unbelievably petty. Emperor Wu sent an envoy named Shi He to force Gojoseon to submit. He failed, but on his way home, Shi He murdered his own Gojoseon escort, and then reported it as a battlefield victory. Instead of punishing him, the emperor rewarded him with a military post right on Gojoseon's border. King Ugeo, enraged, sent troops across that border and killed Shi He, and now Emperor Wu had exactly what he wanted, his excuse for war. In 109 BCE, the invasion came on two fronts. A land army marched out of Liaodong. A fleet crossed the sea. The numbers come from one source, the great Chinese history, the Shiji, so treat them with care. By its account, around 50,000 troops overland and around 7,000 by ship. Not, as some retellings garble it, 50,000 sailors, 50,000 on land, 7,000 at sea. Remember that small naval number, it's about to matter. And the superpowers stumbled. The naval general, Yang Pu, raced ahead with his 7,000 and reached the capital first. King Ugeo, seeing how small the force was, threw open the fortress and sortied out and scattered it. The Han general spent 10 days hiding in the mountains. Then the two invading commanders, land and sea, began to feud instead of fight, and the capital, Wanggeom, held. For the better part of a year, the First Kingdom of Korea was beating the most powerful empire in Asia. The city could not be stormed, so it was broken from inside. A year of siege split Gojoseon's court in two, a war party around the king, and a faction that wanted to surrender. In the summer of 108 BCE, that faction struck. Ministers sent assassins, and King Ugeo was killed by his own men. And here is the detail that makes it a tragedy. Even then, the city did not quit. A loyal minister named Seong-gi rallied the defenders and fought on, until he too was killed from within. Only then did Wanggeom fall. Gojoseon was destroyed less by the army at its walls than by the men inside them. And now the detective's hardest truth. We know these final days for one reason only. The conquerors wrote them down. Almost everything here comes from a single Han source, the chronicle of the very people who destroyed Gojoseon. And yet even that victor's account admits how hard the kingdom fought. The emperor executed one of his own generals, and stripped the other down to a commoner. The men who betrayed Gojoseon and opened the gates, they were made lords. History written by the winners, and the winners don't come off well. On the ruins of the kingdom, the Han Empire built 4 commanderies, colonial districts to govern the conquest. The largest, Lilang, sat in the mainstream view, near modern Pyongyang, and it lasted more than 4 centuries. It was a foreign occupation, but it was also a pipeline pouring iron, writing, and new crafts into the peninsula, feeding the very Korean states now rising all around it. Because conquered is not the same as erased, Gojoseon's people and its traditions didn't disappear. They flowed outward into new kingdoms, Buyo, and above all Goguryeo, the rising power that in the year 313 would finally destroy that last Han commandery, and take the north back. That is the pattern that opens all of Korean history, right here at the very beginning, defeated and then rebuilt. The bear in the cave is still a legend. The date 2333 BCE is still a myth, but behind them stood a real first kingdom, one we pieced back together from a 280-ton tomb, a lute-shaped blade, 3 surviving laws, and the diary of the men who conquered it. 1,500 years later, a new dynasty would rise and take back the old name, Joseon. The name never died. This is where Korea's story begins. This was episode 1. Subscribe and stay for the next.